Hey everyone, welcome back for another video. So for our first intermediate project, we are going to be welding on approximately 1/2 inch carbon steel plate. We are going to be utilizing two different welding electrodes. We are going to be using E7018 and E6010, both of them 1/8 inch in diameter. Now the first part of our project is going to be a T-joint, just like so. The second part of our project is going to be a lap joint, just like this. Now, both parts combined, T-joint on top, lap joint on bottom. One side is going to be 718, the other side is going to be 6010. Go ahead and read the following blueprint to find out which welds go where. And this is how we are going to put our project together. I have my machine set to 135 amps, and the first electrode that I'm going to be using is 7018. However, I am going to be using 6010 to tack weld my pieces together. Some of you might be thinking that 135 amps is going to be extremely high for 6010, and for welding it is, but for tack welding it's going to be fine. This is just going to ensure that my tack welds are penetrating deep and are going to be holding my pieces together. Remember, these are just tack welds, so if you can handle a little bit of heat for just a couple seconds, then everything's going to be fine. The blueprint calls for the lap joint to be the first weld, but here I'm going to demonstrate with the T-joint first. Now when the two plates come together perpendicular to create this T-joint, they are creating a 90-degree angle. And a proper work angle with my electrode would be to cut that in half, or essentially come in at a 45 degree. It's important to keep tabs on your work angle, because if you were to drop your hand, essentially raising the tip of the electrode, then your weld would be more focused on the vertical plate. And just the opposite, if you were to bring your hand up, which would essentially drop the tip of your electrode, then your weld would be more focused on the bottom plate. So it's important here to maintain a 45-degree work angle, that way your weld is evenly balanced between the two plates. And for our travel angle, we're going to have a slight drag. We're not going to have anything too excessive, just something from about a 5 to a 10 degree. And everything that we're going to be doing is just going to be a straight stringer bead. Okay, so here I am about to deposit the first weld with 7018. Remember that my machine is set to 135 amps. My work angle is going to be 45 degrees. I'm going to have a slight drag angle anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees. And it's just going to be a stringer bead, no oscillation. Now as you're welding, it's important to see how your travel speed is affecting the weld. You don't want to go too fast, you don't want to go too slow. As you're moving along in your weld, you want to make sure that your weld puddle is as round as possible. If it's a little oval, that's fine, but if you notice that the rear edge of the weld puddle becomes a little egg-shaped or pointy, then that means you're going too fast and you need to slow down a bit. And if you're going too slow, you'll notice that your weld puddle gets extremely big. If it gets any bigger than, say, 3 times the diameter of your electrode, then you need to speed up because you're depositing too much material than what's actually necessary. And unfortunately here I am experiencing a little bit of arc below, so it kind of looks like I'm long arcing, but I'm really not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten my arc length as much as possible in order to deal with that and compensate. Okay, and for the next weld, I'm going to deposit a weld on the bottom edge of this weld. So this is a multi-pass weld. and I need to make sure that every single additional pass has some overlap with the previous weld. So where my first weld had a work angle of about 45 degrees, I'm going to want this angle to be a little bit more closer to 90. Not exactly a 90 itself, but just a little bit closer. I'm going to want to focus the weld more on the bottom plate and overlap this first weld by about a third to a half. If you can, a half, because it's going to make the third weld a lot easier. So again, your first weld was approximately at 45. Your second weld should be something closer to say a 60 to 70 degree angle. Same thing, slight drag angle, and it's just going to be a stringer bead, and you're going to overlap this first weld by at least half. Now towards the end, I'm slowing down to one, fill in the crater, but also to try to fill in any undercut that I had before when I was experiencing arc blow. And again, once you're done welding, you're going to go ahead and chip the slag off, give it a wire brush, and then we can judge what we need to do from there. Alright, so everything looks pretty good so far. I've still got a little spatter towards the end from when I had arc blow, but there's really nothing that I can do about that right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into our third and final weld. So this one, I'm going to drop my hand to raise the tip of the electrode, and I'm going to try to focus that weld more on the top plate. What I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to focus this weld to not only be on this top plate, but I also want to overlap the first and second weld. So everything should look pretty seamless along the toes of the weld. So where my first weld was done with a 45 degree work angle, and my second weld done at approximately a 60 degree work angle, my third weld is going to be done at something close to a 30 degree work angle. So if this were 45, I'm going to want to drop it down to about 30 degrees, and that's going to be how I deposit the weld. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take another plate and I'm going to position it underneath the T-joint in a way that fashions a lap joint, just like so. I'm going to go ahead and tack weld these pieces together. Now I like to tack weld my plates on the side, that way the tacks are outside of the area that's going to be welded. These are going to be some pretty hot tacks, so just be careful. Now we're going to treat this lap joint just like we would the fillet weld. Just like we would the T-joint, where our first weld is going to be done at a 45-degree angle. So this lap joint, the way that the two plates meet, essentially makes a 90-degree angle, just like with the T-joint, except the area of this joint is a little bit smaller. So, same thing, I'm going to cut it in half at a 45-degree angle, slight drag angle, and I'm just going to deposit a stringer bead right across. So one more time, 45-degree angle, slight drag angle, and then go ahead and start the weld. And then once I get to the end, hold it there, fill in the crater, cut the arc. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this project around. And now it's time to deposit a multi-pass weld on the back side using 6010. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've lowered my amperage from 135 down to 75. Now some of you will say that 75 is pretty low amperage for an electrode like this, but this electrode is made for deep penetration, so a lot of people will say that the welding arc is just as hot as it would be with 7018 at 135, and it still puts off, the same bright light that you would find with 7018 at 135. So I turned it down, that way my secondary camera has somewhat of a chance to capture the welding arc. So what's going to happen is, just like before with 7018 on the reverse side, we are going to deposit our first weld with a 45-degree work angle, slight drag angle, and we're going to use a whip-it motion. Then when we do our second weld, we're going to come in closer to a 60 to 70-degree angle. We're going to deposit the weld on this bottom plate, but then also overlapping the first weld by at least half. And then the third weld, we're actually going to come up to approximately a 30-degree work angle, focus some of the weld on this top plate, while also overlapping the first weld and part of the second weld. So let's get to it. So as I said before, when we're depositing our first weld with 6010, we're going to cut into this root at a 45-degree work angle, slight drag angle, and we're going to use a whip-it motion to deposit our weld. Now the slag produced by 6010 requires almost no effort at all to remove. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to glide my chipping hammer across the top of the slag, and you're going to see it remove rather quickly. If you do need to chip away at it, do so lightly, and honestly it comes off rather easily, and then you can use the wire brush to remove the rest. Pretty simple and easy to do. Now for the second weld, as I mentioned before, we're going to come in at approximately 60 to 70 degrees. We're going to deposit the weld on this bottom plate while also overlapping this first weld, and same thing, we're going to utilize a slight whipping motion. Now for the third and final weld for this T-joint with E6010, we're going to come in somewhat of at a 30-degree angle. We're going to place the weld on this top plate while also overlapping this first and second weld. Now what I've done is I've used the vice grips to position position this project completely upside down, and then I've used another piece of scrap steel to hold it up or balance it from behind. This is just so that way I can access that lap joint that's at the bottom, and I can use this method to hold the material as I'm depositing my last weld with 6010 on that lap joint.